Tonight on Bridge City News, close to 1,600 Lethbridge College students are getting ready for a big celebration. Rattlesnake season has arrived in Lethbridge. We talk to a rattlesnake expert how you can best protect yourself and your pets. And another province has gone Tory blue. We hear from the new Premier designate from PEI, Dennis King, who won a minority government.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The University of Lethbridge is receiving $1.6 million in funding towards two projects that are set to support sustainable and cultural resource development. Ainsley O'Reilly explains the impact these big projects will have.
For the first time in history, the Piikani Nation will have a database that allows them to track information about the land and its people. In conjunction with the U of L, the community will receive $430,000 in funding to support the project.
What we hope is to empower our own nation to make our own decisions with regards to land and land development. Currently, the government does engage our community with land and land projects, specifically with land planning. This will ensure that our community is well versed amongst itself to make informed decisions.
Everything from cultural monitoring, so traditional land sites, to housing, to waterways, to the environment in itself, to sacred sites, any traditional land use. For the express purpose of preserving the cultural sites, but also for doing business with non-Indigenous companies that might want to collaborate with communities.
Today's second big announcement was for the Geography Department, which will receive new technology, allowing for researchers to get an intense scan of water and land.
The difference with this new technology is that the multispectral capability allows us to kind of classify individual forest canopies, and it allows us to see deeper into the forest canopy, into the ground level. For the last few years, the University of Lethbridge has been a national leader in remote sensing in general, airborne and satellite-based, and so this gives us our own capability to basically lead and implement missions anywhere around the world.
The technology behind me is just 5 years old, and Dr. Hopkinson says that it doesn't even compare to the new technology coming in. That one's called the Titan, and experts are calling it the ecosystem MRI. There's only a few in the world, and Lethbridge will have one of them. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
The University of Lethbridge has appointed Mike Mann for a third term as president and vice chancellor. Mann is the sixth president of the university and came to the U of L in 2010. Now, during his tenure, he introduced the university's first academic and strategic research plan, followed closely by Destination 2020. A key aspect was the construction of the new Science and Academic Building, a $280 million science teaching and research facility that will officially open in September of this year. Mann holds a PhD in education from the University of North Carolina, and in 2017, he made over $500,000 in salary with living expenses. A major celebration is taking place at Lethbridge College on Friday. More than 1,600 students will receive degrees, diplomas, and certificates. The convocation ceremony gets underway at 1 p.m. at the NMAC Center. Some of the highlights of the three-day event will include an Indigenous Honor Night celebrating the accomplishments of Indigenous students, family, and community members. The City of Lethbridge plans to build more affordable houses over the next 5 years. Several important factors about the city's demographics included its higher per capita population of seniors and a higher percentage of people living with disabilities than most places in our province.
People typically think of Lethbridge as either a university town or a retirement town, and that's partly true, but the fastest growing segment of our population is actually 30 to 35, so young families. So there is a need for that starter home or sort of multi-family residential for younger, smaller families. That's something that we know is a market need here, and it's driven by that growing demographic. And what we see is that students are quite happy to rent and typically come from somewhere else in the province. About 75% of the students at the university come from somewhere else, and then they leave. But as soon as they start having babies or wanting to start a family, then they tend to come back to Lethbridge. That's where we see population growth.
Information for housing needs to come from the city's census and feedback from social outreach organizations that work with vulnerable people. Rattlesnake season has arrived. The deadly creatures are being spotted all over the city, including the coulees. BCN's Loris Alexander spoke to Lethbridge's own snake whisperer, the one you can call when you run into a rattler.
Just the sound will make you freeze.
Well, rattlesnakes rely primarily on their camouflage. So unless they are really concerned that you have either located them or that you're going to step on them or touch them, something like this, they won't rattle. Most of the time they'll just sit and let the camouflage do the work, and I've met people all over Lethbridge that said they grew up here, they've spent their whole lives in the coulees, they've never come across a rattlesnake.
Ryan Heavyhead, Lethbridge's own snake whisperer, usually gets the call to get these slithering snakes out of people's yards.
You can have them nesting, like denning in your yard and not know about it for sure all summer long.
Generally speaking, Ryan says rattlesnakes try to avoid people and property, but when they're looking for food, water, and shelter, they'll go anywhere.
It's actually very dangerous to mess around with the rattlesnake. That's why all the bites are practically forearm and hand bites, because people try to handle it themselves. So if you come across a rattlesnake on your property, there is a city hotline you can call. It's probably going to bring me to your door.
Ryan says people in Lethbridge are more likely to be hospitalized for peanut exposure than for a bite of a rattlesnake. Still then, he advises to exercise caution.
If you get bit by a rattlesnake, right, first thing you need to do is get any jewelry off the affected limbs. Any rings off your fingers, if you got bit on the hand or the arm, watches, anything tight, get it off because you're going to swell up. Don't do the home remedy thing, you know, that you've seen the survival store, you know, suction cup, rattlesnake remedy. Don't cut yourself with razor blades and stuff like that. Then you're just going to be envenomated and you're going to need stitches and stuff when you get to the hospital. You're not going to get the venom out by suction, so you just need to go to the hospital.
So no matter where you see one, where you hear one, remember, the rattle is a warning. Stay back and hopefully stay safe. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
After a long winter season, Evergreen Golf Courses in Lethbridge says that Tiger Woods winning the Masters, combined with the sunny weather we have now, is bringing more golfers to the links this year.
Obviously, with Tiger winning the Masters, that's one of the best comeback stories of sports in general. So that's got everybody really excited about the golf season. Young and old, so kids, we see kids like as little as 5 years old that talk about Tiger to, you know, some of our senior golfers are excited to see Tiger back in his winning form. So that's definitely added an extra boost to the excitement for golf. And yeah, we just hope this weather continues and that we have a very strong year. But all things so far have been excellent.
From the greens to the slopes, Lake Louise Ski Resort is proposing some big changes to its operation in Banff National Park. The resort wants to give 1,000 hectares of land back to Parks Canada in exchange for being able to upgrade its facilities. The plan would involve building a new mountaintop lodge and another day lodge next to the original Whiskey Jack Lodge. Lake Louise also wants to build new lifts to access more beginner and intermediate terrain. Parks Canada says no decisions on the proposal have been made. Smoke from the out-of-control wildfire in Biggar, Saskatchewan has forced the evacuation of dozens of patients from a local hospital there. Authorities say 53 long-term care residents have been transferred to a healthcare centre in Rosetown. Another 8 patients have been sent to Saskatoon. Communities in the area declared a state of emergency after the blaze rolled into an area about 6 kilometres southwest of Biggar. Saskatchewan's fire commissioner says heavy wind and dry conditions caused the fire to grow rapidly. Authorities are urging people across the province not to have open fires. Saskatchewan's premier has sent another letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau repeating his request for help for canola farmers. Scott Moe says he's been waiting near a month for a response to his first request for Ottawa to increase cash advances to farmers who are affected by China's decision to block Canadian canola. Scott Moe says he's been waiting near a month for a response to his first request for Ottawa to increase cash advances to farmers who are affected by China's decision to block Canadian canola. Moe says he wants the federal advance payment program to increase from $400,000 to $1 million. The province also wants the program's end of March deadline extended a month and that no interest is charged on the maximum payment amount until the issue with China is resolved. Voters in Prince Edward Island have traded in 12 years of Liberal rule for a progressive Conservative minority government. The Tories under new leader Dennis King won 12 districts in yesterday's election. The upstart Green Party won a record 8 seats to become the official opposition for the first time ever. The Liberals took 5 seats. King admits that he's overwhelmed by the party's victory.
I promise every day no matter where this journey takes us, that I'm the MLA for District 15 first. You know where I live, you know my number, and we're going to work hard for District 15 every day. So thank you very, very much. I want to congratulate Peter and his growing team of Green Party members. A very impressive showing tonight, and it shows that Prince Edward Island wants the parties of Prince Edward Island to put partisan nature behind them, to work together, to do what's best for Prince Edward Island, and I'm looking forward to working with all elected officials in the legislature to make that happen.
Many residents in flood-ravaged areas of Quebec say they're staying in their homes. The residents of the Montreal area islands say they're equipped with boats, pumps, and generators.
We're working hard to keep the water out, even though we're like one of the lowest spots in the Montreal area, to pump the water faster than it's coming in. So it's constant pump changing, adjusting, making in the middle of the night, pump failure, repairs, impellers being stuck, too much sand coming in because of the dams weren't done properly. It's a whole bunch of, every single thing is different.
The bridge is closed for pedestrian and all type of vehicle. Only a loader can pass goods and material that's needed inside. So now we'll have to install dock with boats to transport people every day to go do their things and come back at night. So we're in figuring out how many kid docks and boats we need right now, but it's still functioning with Oliver there, and other boats are already started.
Community members gathered to remember those who lost their lives in a van attack north of Toronto a year ago. The ceremony honored the 10 people who died and the 16 who were injured when a rental van plowed into pedestrians along a busy stretch of Yonge Street.
The enormity of grief and sadness over the past year has been overwhelming for many of us. This has been a defining moment in this community and in the city. Many of us have not been the same. Some of us are more grateful for the life that we have, more aware of the people around us, and more mindful of the ways we are called to contribute towards the building up of our own communities. Let this moment be a rededication of all that is good in us and in Toronto. May we continue to support the families of those who died, those who have been injured, those neighbors and first responders who were on the scene helping, and those who need us to carry them in our hearts.
The death toll from the Easter Sunday bomb attacks in Sri Lanka has risen to 359. The terrorist attack also injured more than 500 people. A local pastor with a British-Pakistani Christian organization spoke about what he witnessed during that horrific day in Colombo, Sri Lanka.
It was horrible to listen, like people were dead all on the ground, and they were even some of them were burnt. You cannot find out even, and you cannot identify their bodies. So they were packed into black color polythene bags, and others were put into white color body bags, and people were screaming. They didn't know what to do. It was a mayhem, like, never happened in Sri Lanka like that, like kind of a bomb blast in a church. I don't think like in the history like we can witness something like that. Even that we had 3 decades of war, we cannot even say like such a bombing has taken place during that period even.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says unfortunately there's not a lot of incentive for governments to protect those who are worshiping at churches.
Governments don't really have an incentive to protect their churches. They have an incentive to protect their, tourist sites and places where, will drive down tourism. In this case, 3 hotels were hit. But do they really have the incentive to protect churches and synagogues and even mosques, places of worship that are, nonprofit centers, places where people go to pray? What's the incentive besides for saving innocent lives?
Catch my full interview with Lisa discussing threats and where the terrorists may strike next. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Leaders of Great Britain and Ireland joined mourners at the funeral of Lyra McKee. She's the journalist who was shot dead during rioting in Northern Ireland last week. UK Prime Minister Theresa May was among hundreds of people celebrating the life of a young woman whose death in paramilitary gunfire has shocked a region which is usually accustomed to violence. Some of McKee's family and friends wore Marvel items in tribute to her love for fictional worlds. McKee, who was just 29, was killed last Thursday as she reported on anti-police rioting in the city of Londonderry, also known as Derry. She's the first journalist killed on the job in the UK in almost 20 years. The NHL playoffs continued last night in the Western Conference matchup. The San Jose Sharks beat the Las Vegas Golden Knights 5-4 to take that series 4-3. In Game 7 between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Boston Bruins, it was Boston coming out on top 5-1. Leafs players said the loss was extremely disappointing.
We felt good. We felt good where we were at. We felt like we were skating well. Creating opportunities. Obviously, that goal, was big when we came out. But that's the way it goes. I think we felt good. I think we did some good things, and it is what it is.
We weren't really able to really put them in a really tough spot, and it's the way it goes sometimes. And you're playing a very good hockey team in Boston, and I think a lot of people expected this series to go long, and we still had a great opportunity here today, and it's just disappointing that we weren't able to come through.
I thought we weathered the storm the first 5, which is important. You come to an atmosphere like this, Game 7. The crowd's going to get into it. They're going to be, on you pretty fast. So I thought we weathered it pretty good, and then, we had our chances. We were skating pretty well to start. A lot of shots in the first 2 periods. Just made a couple mistakes. They scored, and then, we weren't able to climb out of that hole.
Another beautiful spring-like day in the Windy City today. The mercury will be dropping by quite a bit just in time for the weekend. Complete look at the weather forecast is coming up. Just a few clouds today, and we had double-digit temperatures once again. Tonight, a slight chance of showers developing with a low near -4. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high near 12. Friday, a low-pressure system returns with showers and a high near 10. Saturday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 11. Sunday, a chance of snow with the mercury dropping to +1. Monday, mainly cloudy with a high of 5. Tuesday, lots of cloud cover gain and a high near 9. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 15 and an average low of +1. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1977 at 27 degrees, and the record low was -10 in 1959. Sunrise was at 6:22, sunset at 8:37. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Victoria will be mainly cloudy at 16, clouds at 14 for Vancouver. Sunshine and 11 for Calgary on Thursday. Mainly sunny and 10 for Edmonton. Just a few clouds and 10 as well for Regina. Pretty much the same picture in Saskatoon. Mainly sunny and 13 degrees for Winnipeg tomorrow. A mixture of sun and cloud and 16 for Toronto. Ottawa will also have lots of sunshine and 16. Montreal will be mostly cloudy and 12. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be overcast and 5. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be mainly cloudy and 6. Charlottetown, PEI will have rain mixed with snow and a high of 2. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect snow mixed with ice pellets and a high of only +1 for tomorrow. As expected, the Bank of Canada held its key lending rate at 1.75% today. Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz says the Canadian economy has stalled and the benchmark rate will not be increased anytime soon. The bank also cut its 2019 growth forecast for the world. The feds have given the Canadian division of the Wild Blueberry Association of North America $1.6 million. The funds will be used to promote the fruit around the world. Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bebeau says the cash will help the wild blueberry sector expand globally. She says it will also help to promote the benefits of Canadian wild blueberries to existing and emerging markets in the U.S., Germany, France, the UK, and in Asia. Canada is the world's largest producer and exporter of wild blueberries, with exports worth an estimated $239 million a year. Cenovus Energy says its first quarter results were boosted by improved Western Canadian oil prices due to the Alberta government's curtailment program. It's reporting a profit of $110 million or 9 cents a share. That compared with a loss of $654 million or 53 cents a share a year earlier. The company says the higher oil prices offset the impact of reduced production and increased operating costs during the first quarter. Gross sales totaled nearly $5.2 billion, up from $4.7 billion in the same quarter last year. Profits shot up last quarter at Canadian Pacific Railway as crude by rail revenues increased and fuel costs declined. The Calgary-based company reports its net income rose 25% over this time last year to $434 million in the quarter ended March 31st. Quarterly revenues jumped to $1.77 billion, up 6% year over year. On an adjusted basis, diluted earnings per share rose 3% to $2.79 from $2.70. Analysts' expectations were just over $3. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the death toll from the Easter Sunday bomb attacks in Sri Lanka has risen to 359. The terrorist attack also injured more than 500 people. An Islamic militant group has claimed responsibility. It seems that our Prime Minister's carbon footprint is getting larger and larger. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Looking to sell some extra items after decluttering your home? Come and sell your old treasures at the Windy City Bazaar Flea Market and Yard Sale on Saturday, April 27th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Royal Canadian Legion in Lethbridge. This is also open to small home-based businesses looking to sell and market their products. For vendor inquiries, email lethbridgewindycitybazaar@gmail.com. And for more information, check it out on Facebook, Windy City Bazaar Flea Market and Yard Sale. Come for a fun time and help support a worthy cause. The Kidney Foundation Southern Alberta branch is hosting a 3-kilometer and a 6-kilometer walk or run on Saturday, May 11th at Henderson Lake Park. The route is designed for walkers, runners, strollers, and participants with limited mobility. Register individually or as a team by calling 1-866-956-2724 or go online to kidneywalk.ca. The Lethbridge Association of the Blind provides numerous activities for the blind and visually impaired in the Lethbridge area. These events include dinners with entertainment, local museum tours, and much more. For more information, call 403-942-1677 or email brownwj@shaw.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Many Canadians were upset that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who's been pushing a carbon tax, flew to Tofino, British Columbia for a nice surfing trip. Joining me now is one of our regular political contributors, Brian Lilly. Brian, the PM has quite the carbon footprint lately.
He really does. I mean, he's been all over the country in the past couple of weeks. And just like during his Christmas break trip down to Florida, where he flew back to Ottawa and then back to Florida the same day so that he could have some meetings in person, well, he's doing a series of trips that make no sense. He was in Toronto last weekend. Then he flew back to Ottawa. Then he flew down to Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge and did some events there. Then he flew back to Ottawa. Then he flew down to Hamilton. So that's 3 different flights in a week back and forth to Southern Ontario. Then he leaves Hamilton, flies back to Ottawa, and then flies across the country to Tofino, British Columbia, where he's, as you said, off surfing. Now, look, everyone's entitled to vacations. This guy gets more vacations than most, and don't tell me he works every weekend because I follow his schedule. He doesn't. He takes downtime like everybody should. Otherwise, you end up like you and I, Hal. You get a little sick, you get a little under the weather if you don't take your downtime. So I don't begrudge him that. But this guy is pushing a carbon tax. He's currently battling Saskatchewan and Ontario in court. He's about to be battling the newly elected government of Alberta over the idea of a carbon tax. And he is jet setting all over the place. You know, why couldn't he have stayed down in southern Ontario for at least one of those trips? Why couldn't it be more like Stephen Harper or Jean Chrétien? You know, those guys were in office for about a decade. Do you remember them taking big vacations or regular vacations? Stephen Harper was blasted for taking his kids to a baseball game once. You know, this guy flies out to Whistler for ski weekends. He flies to Tofino for surf weekends. He goes to Florida, the Bahamas. And one of these trips ends up having basically the carbon footprint for one trip is the equivalent of what the average Canadian is responsible for on a per capita basis for greenhouse gas emissions. Oh, and by the way, just hearing about this, BC Premier John Horgan, where, you know, gas is very expensive in British Columbia, he did not get to see Trudeau during his Tofino trip, but he did say, with the high price of gas in British Columbia, you know, $1.68 to $1.80, he's going to raise the issue of gas prices when he sees the Prime Minister next. Maybe you should have gone surfing with him in Tofino, and he could have, you know, explained that most of the problem are BC taxes.
And just wait, if Alberta Premier Designate Jason Kenney implements Bill 12 and turns off the taps, you think $1.70 a litre is expensive now in Vancouver. You just wait. Now, speaking of our Prime Minister, as we were talking earlier, he will be featured on an episode of The Simpsons. But Brian, it's not going to be Trudeau's voice.
It's going to be a young reporter. He's got ties to Calgary. His name's Lucas Meyer. He's a reporter with News Talk 1010, a big talk radio station here in Toronto, one that I used to be the Parliament Hill bureau chief for years ago. And I see Lucas at Queen's Park on a regular basis. He's a really good reporter. I didn't know he did all these impressions until the other day. He broke the news that he'd done this video of impressions for his friends and family, just, you know, and then loaded it up to YouTube to send it around to them. Somebody put it on to the producers at The Simpsons. They got in touch with him. He did an over-the-phone audition, and they said, "You're hired. You're going to play Justin Trudeau." Now, it's funny because this is a guy who will hold politicians to account, including Justin Trudeau. And if you remember back to the very first news conference that Trudeau did on the SNC-Lavalin scandal, when he was questioned, and he just kept going back to that same line, "At no time did I direct." Well, the reporter that pushed him the most on that and said, and if you listen back to the news conference, you hear this guy say, "I didn't ask about directing, Prime Minister. I asked about pressure," and pushed him. That was Lucas Meyer. So he's, you know, going from holding the feet to the fire to imitating the Prime Minister on The Simpsons. And, you know, as he's been saying, as someone that grew up with The Simpsons, it's a huge honor for him. So very happy for Lucas this Sunday when it airs.
Alberta Premier Designate Jason Kenney picked his top staffers. A couple are right from here in Lethbridge. Now, he has some that have quite a bit of experience, including a former top aide to former PM Stephen Harper.
Yeah, Howard Anglin, who was an assistant to Jason Kenney, he was his chief of staff back when Kenney was immigration minister, worked with him in various departments, moved on to the Prime Minister's office and helped run the PMO with Jenny Byrne. Howard has been with the Canadian Constitution Foundation for the past couple of years out of Calgary. He left that recently. I suspected it was to go with Kenney if and when Kenney won the election, and he did. And today he's been announced as his principal secretary. So he's brought together some people from British Columbia who worked with the BC Liberals out there, which of course is not the same as the federal Liberals. He's brought together people from Alberta politics and people from the federal scene. So it looks like he's putting together a solid team. And Nick Koolsberg, who a longtime aide to Jason Kenney, has announced that he's leaving. He's going on to the private sector after 12 years in politics.
Filipinos' president is not very happy these days. He says Canada needs to take back its garbage or he'll sail it to Canada and dump it off on the coast. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, Rodrigo Duterte, the Filipino president, is quite something. And he's upset over this load of garbage that was sent to the Philippines years ago. Now, the government of Canada's position is, hey, it's not our job. We didn't send it. This was a private contract. And so there was a company. It was, had a contract to send over recyclable plastic to the Philippines, and then it would be recycled. And But instead, they sent over shipping containers full of trash, including adult diapers and things that aren't supposed to go in the regular garbage. So it's been sitting there. It's been a back and forth. And Duarte's just had enough. And he said, we'll go to war with Canada over this. We will not take this. I'll put it on a ship and I'll sail it over myself and dump it off the West Coast. I don't know how this is going to end. This is nothing that, it goes back to the Harper era, but the court cases really picked up over the last couple of years. I can't fault anybody in our government for it. They had nothing to do with it. But we're probably going to have to take it back one way or another. But it would just be funny to see the Filipino president out front on the ship dumping it off himself. We'll see if that actually happens.
Brian, on a more serious note, vigils were held recently on the one-year anniversary of the van attack in Toronto. Tell me more about that.
It is something that the city has still not shaken. I was not here last year, but covered it extensively from afar. I can tell you, being in Toronto now, this is something that people are, they're just caught up by, reminded on the anniversary, which was Tuesday. There were several vigils on Tuesday. The mayor was out several times at various community events, at church events, public memorials, and a lot of people still saying, look, I witnessed it happen, and I can't get the assistance, the mental health help that I need. That is really sad that it's going on that route. But it is shocking that it's been a year, and soon it will be the anniversary, another anniversary, that being the Danforth shooting. That'll be coming up in the next little while.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, we hear about it often in relation to EMS and our military. Brian, more than 6,000 veterans from the Afghan war are being treated for PTSD treatment right now.
And when you consider the size of our military, Hal, which is only about active duty members, 50 to 60,000, about 10% of that being treated for PTSD. Many of them are going to be on the reserve side, and when you add in the reserves, in the civilians, it makes the population larger. But that's a significant number. There has been a big push on by the military to try and make sure that people get the services they need. Of course, there was the controversy over some people having to wait for these services, and then the man whose father had served, but he didn't, got PTSD treatment paid for by Veterans Affairs because he killed a woman, he killed a police officer, and said he contracted PTSD from that. So there's always a back and forth, but I can tell you that from speaking to my contacts in the military, they take this very seriously. They are concerned about it. They're also concerned about the increasing use of medical marijuana as a way to treat this. That has spiked, and some people worrying that perhaps people are using this as an excuse to get free, paid-for marijuana, and questioning the efficacy of that particular treatment when it comes to something like PTSD.
Many people were horrified that Omar Khadr appeared on a Quebec TV talk show recently. People actually stood up, clapping, smiling, and happy to see him, Brian.
Yeah, and he talked about just wanting to have a normal life. I don't know how you have a normal life when he may be responsible for the injuries that some of our service members had and sustained in Afghanistan. Yes, he was arrested and sent to Guantanamo Bay after a firefight with American troops where he killed Specialist Sergeant Christopher Spear. But, we've seen the videos of him making roadside bombs. We don't know where those roadside bombs ended up. We don't know if they ended up being detonated under the vehicle of a Canadian at some point. And this guy who got $10.5 million, who wins in our courts every time he shows up, goes on Quebec CBC, on Radcan, on Tout le monde en parle is the name of the show, and whines that he doesn't have a normal life. Well, I'm sorry. I don't feel bad for you. I just don't. And I don't think most Canadians do. I think most Canadians are still outraged by that payment, which was given to him without a single day in court. They handed over $10.5 million. And by the way, he bought a mini mall in Edmonton. I've even heard he overpaid for it, but, he wants a normal life, and just to be able to get a job. You're a landlord now. You've got money. You don't need to work. You have our money. Shut up and go away. Those are my thoughts. It may seem harsh, Hal. Those are my thoughts.
No, many people agree with you there, Brian. The Canada Revenue Agency wrote off a loan to Chrysler, and they also wrote off a tax bill of $133 million by just one taxpayer. Do we know who this person was?
No, we don't know if it's a person or a corporation. My guess is a corporation, and it has to do with some kind of excise tax collected. You know, can you imagine how much money you would have to make to owe $133 million to the Canada Revenue Agency? I can't. I'd like to earn that much money that I could pay $133 million or owe $133 million to Canada Revenue Agency, but I simply don't. So this was part of a document dump that was uncovered through access to information. And at the same time as they were forgiving Chrysler that loan, they just said, we're never going to collect on this, let it go. Unfortunate for the taxpayer, but not dissimilar to if someone has a credit card bill or a car loan and they're just never going to pay it no matter what the company does, they eventually write off your bad loan. They've written off this bad tax receipt, and we will never find out who it is unless the person steps forward.
Could you imagine? $133 million is your tax bill. Wow. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh just released a book that reveals he was sexually assaulted as a boy.
Yeah, this is a new book from Jagmeet Singh. And, you know, look, I don't know the man well. I've been watching him over the last little while since he became federal NDP leader. And he decided to release a bit of a biography of himself in the lead up to an election. Not uncommon for politicians, but in it. And it was excerpted by newspapers over the weekend. He reveals that growing up as a boy in Windsor, Ontario, his father put him into Taekwondo because of bullying. Some of it racially motivated bullying. He describes being told, you're the brown kid, your skin's dirty, why don't you shower, why don't you wash so your skin's not dirty? And his father said, okay, you need to go into something. You need to learn to defend yourself. And he put him into Taekwondo, which he did well at for a while. But he doesn't name the person, but he gives him an initial, says that he started sexually abusing Jagmeet Singh. And, it appears to be one of those things that, unfortunately, the family did not know at the time. He's excelling. The coach is doing really well for him. But the abuse would be tied to his performance in Taekwondo matches. He said that it took him years to be able to admit to it, and even longer to be able to talk about it. But, you know, as is always the case with these things, I think it is important for victims to be able to come forward and discuss it so that those who are suffering know they're not alone and that there's a way out. I've known people, thankfully it's never happened to me, and I pray not to my children, not that I know of, but you know, your heart has to break for people like that.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of federal party leaders, the Green Party's Elizabeth May got married recently, and she tied the knot with the brother of the late Canadian actress Margot Kidder.
Yeah, she married John Kidder on Earth Day, so this past Monday. She asked people to show up on bike or carpool or take an electric vehicle, of course. John Kidder is an entrepreneur in the Victoria and Vancouver areas, and it is the first wedding for May, who I believe is 64. So congratulations to her and to Mr. Kidder. Many happy returns to them both.
Now, Barack Obama is coming back to Canada for another speaking engagement. After a stop in Calgary, Ottawa will be next. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that his Calgary visit went very well. Lots of tickets sold. When the Clintons came to Toronto a little while ago, a lot of empty seats. People did not want to go out and see Bill and Hillary, so now they're coming to see Barack Obama. It's going to be at the Canadian Tire Centre in the nation's capital. I can tell you, as someone whose politics are not the same as Barack Obama, you may have picked up on that, but I've been in the room with him several times. Big rooms, small rooms. He's a fascinating guy. He's a great speaker. And I think an awful lot of people with an interest in politics will want to go out and hear what he has to say.
One of our regular political contributors, Brian Lilly, joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is looking to bring Iranian exports to zero. The U.S. is moving to stop all countries around the world from purchasing Iranian oil. Now, to talk about this and other big stories from around the globe is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining me from Los Angeles. Lisa, will most countries stay away from Iranian oil?
Well, it's going to be hard because I'm sure Iran will invite them to buy the oil with very high incentives, very low prices, which it's done. And many countries, including India and China and Iraq, have not heeded to the global warnings of not purchasing oil from Iran and have gone for the low prices. And this can only go so far, but it's definitely a very, very targeted measure to curb Iran's income. It's almost been a year since the United States decided to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. It was last May that Donald Trump, he ran on the campaigned on pulling out of the Iran deal and did, in fact, do so. And then, since then have the U.S. has been looking for ways to target and really strangle the Iranian economy in a way that affects the government more than the people. And I think this is probably the best way to do so.
And oil has spiked to a 6-month high after the Trump crackdown on Iran.
Sure. So it's a supply-demand equation here, and if you're going to shut down one supply source, you spike the others. So the world still goes on, and people still need oil. And like you said, there will be those who still continue to purchase oil from Iran, but there will be many who will not.
Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz after the U.S. and sanction waivers. Iraq, Saudi Arabia are ready to up oil output as the U.S. cuts off Iran waivers. Tell me more about that.
Sure. So it is every man for himself. Everybody's basically doing what they can to take advantage of the situation. So with Iran, it's more the war of words. They threaten to close off the Strait of Hormuz because that's what they can do in order to choke off the global economy. They have access to the strait where East meets West, and they do this all the time where they threaten to shut down the strait. Meanwhile, you have other oil outputters saying, don't worry, we'll pick up the global slack here. We'll put out more oil so that consumers don't have to buy from Iran. How gracious of everyone to offer to do so. But everyone's looking to make that buck. And they'll do it at the expense of others. So now this is good news for those who are selling oil and can kind of make extra profit here.
Lisa, tragedy on Easter Sunday as churches and hotels were bombed in Sri Lanka. The latest death toll is over 300, with more than 500 people injured. Police are investigating the attacks that may have been from an obscure local Islamist group. Tell me more about that.
Right. So all eyes were on this local Islamic group. They thought, well, it couldn't just be this local group because this is a very sophisticated attack. Think about it. 3 hotels, 3 churches, all simultaneous, all on Easter Sunday. This is almost, a 9/11 scale attack. So authorities knew that this is coming from something much bigger. And of course, today, ISIS claimed responsibility. And now we know that it's coming or was directed maybe to a local group, but from a higher source. This happens very often. And unfortunately, it's because you have recruits and volunteers in all parts of the world willing to blow themselves up in the name of Islamic terrorism. In this case, it's horrific details that come out. Like you said, very high death toll, very high number of those injured. That number continues to climb. And, you hear these details about one of the suicide bombers, for example, in the hotel, standing in line at the buffet for breakfast that very morning, trying to blend in with the crowd. Horrific. It's just horrific. And of course, whether we call this homegrown or we call this a large-scale ISIS attack, doesn't take away from the reality of the situation that they're still looking to do this. As much as we can talk about ISIS being on the decline, as they are physically in terms of their land and their caliphate in Iraq and in Syria in particular, these attacks still continue.
Now, some news agencies are reporting these bombings are retaliation for the mosque shootings in Christchurch, New Zealand. But do we know for sure?
Sure. So, that could be the case. And I'm hearing the same, chatter that you are. But do they really need a justification? Have they needed a justification from in the past, when all of these different attacks go on in all parts of the world, small or large, whether the death toll is 8 or 800, they don't need a justification. And should they want to connect the 2 points, is to say, well, Muslims died. Well, you know what? It's not Christian, terrorism. It happens. It's not a thing. It's not an epidemic, though. And I think that that's where we have to be very careful. Of course, every single attack is horrific, whether it's in a church or a mosque or a synagogue. But when there's an epidemic, and we can stop that epidemic by being more specific and targeting that epidemic than we should. In this case, for example, authorities had gotten warning that there will be attacks by an Islamic group on Easter Sunday. But that warning, those threats, were not passed on to the Prime Minister. They weren't passed on to the higher powers in order to really take this threat seriously. And look where it landed them. I think that this is a part of a much larger conversation. Unfortunately, we're still having this conversation after so many years of suffering through this type of terrorism. We had it here in the United States. I know Canada has had its fair share of one-offs, as they call them, but they're not one-offs. This is part of a much larger plan and recruitment plan, and they're doing it online. They don't need the caliphate. They don't need that land in order to find these volunteers that are willing to kill innocent people.
Yeah, I was in Ottawa in 2014 when there was the lone wolf attack on Parliament Hill when Zahef Bebo shot Nathan Cirillo from the Hamilton Argylls 3 times in the back. He was unarmed, standing at the National War Memorial. It was very tragic, and I was there to cover that as well. Now, there are warnings that ISIS or Al-Qaeda may carry out more attacks of Catholic churches. Are these just empty threats, or more terrorist attacks on the way, Lisa?
There has been a fixation over the last decade or so on this, war on Christians, as we've called it. And why is that? It's because in certain parts of the world, many individuals are turning to Christianity as a place where they could find solace, and they can find peace, and they can find meditation, and they can find a religion that they can relate to. We talk about globalization in the form of social media and eBay and Amazon bringing the world together, but it's also brought people closer to that Western form of worship, which they could relate to perhaps in a way that's more modern and more suited to their lifestyles. And we see this very often in places like Iraq and Iran, where people have to worship in underground churches because it's actually forbidden for Muslims to turn from Islam and turn to Christianity or convert to Christianity. Should we take this threat as just another threat or empty words? I don't think so. I think that it's very, very important to heed their threats. And, I was on a radio show yesterday, and the host pointed out that, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, and he said the same thing, governments don't really have an incentive to protect their churches. They have an incentive to protect their, tourist sites and places where, will drive down tourism. In this case, 3 hotels were hit. But do they really have the incentive to protect the churches and synagogues and even mosques, places of worship that are, nonprofit centers, places where people go to pray? What's the incentive besides for saving innocent lives? And that should be obviously incentive enough. But this is a real thing, and especially in these parts of the world, we should really take focus, and hopefully there will be more security, more protection, and more attention paid.
Amen to that. Now, the Voice of America is reporting that the United States and the Taliban see no reason to slow down Afghan peace talks. Let's talk more about that.
It's interesting. Where has it gotten us so far, but they don't want to slow down? We're going nowhere very fast, so they want to continue doing so. I think for the U.S., this becomes an issue of just putting things to rest if they can. And that is such a pipe dream in the case of Afghanistan, that has been a war-torn, precarious state for so many generations. It's not just the past few years. And of course, the U.S. is withdrawing from Afghanistan. We don't want to leave a mess, but mess it is. I think it's going to take many years before the people of Afghanistan can nation build and create a stable society in which they could have the security that they need. And now we're in talks with the Taliban to create that stability. It's like what we have with the Palestinians. We have Hamas in place in order to lead and guide and govern the Palestinians. And it's been horrific. It's been awful. It's been, a terror organization basically leading a people to more terror and more strife and more hunger and all of that. So I don't see this going anywhere productive, but the U.S. doesn't want to stop. They want to continue going with these talks to see if they can perhaps come to some sort of resolution before they call it quits.
Lisa, let's talk about Israel versus Palestine. The Trump administration is discouraging the use of a two-state solution, and the PLO is discussing revoking Israel recognition, ending a security coordination.
Right, so they call it Israel and the Palestinian territories. There's no Palestine as of now, and in going forward with the peace plan, the U.S. has leaked this information almost. We don't know much about the peace plan. We know that Jared Kushner has said that this will require both sides to make concessions that they may not want to make, but it will put them at a place that will create more progress than we've seen before. And we know that every generation, every president has sought to create peace between the Palestinian people and Israel, and it has not worked. This has been, an ongoing battle. It seems like nothing's enough, and no concessions will ever get them the peace that they want. But that being said, there's been, a lot of fire exchange on both sides. Hamas going back to business as usual and firing missiles into civilian areas from Gaza into Israel. And Israel having to retaliate or answer those shots. And, again, an ongoing, very, very vicious cycle. But we're promised that we're going to get something good from the White House. And Jared Kushner said he's cooking something good. So we'll see what that entails.
We've had our issues here in Canada with illegal or irregular border crossers from upstate New York into Quebec. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered a crackdown on visa overstays in the latest push against illegal immigration where you are.
Yes. So obviously the numbers are telling a very, very, very different reality from what people in the United States think about U.S. immigration. The perception right now, and maybe that's because of the mainstream media, is that Donald Trump has basically, with an iron fist, shut down all immigration, meaning there's nobody here on visa, there's nobody here on a tourist visa, there's nobody here on a student visa, there's nobody here from a Muslim country because we have a Muslim ban in place, there's nobody here crossing the border, and these are all false. There are numbers to prove the fact that we have a lot of illegal immigrants still coming through. We have a lot of people overstaying their visas, and this crackdown is meant to really vet out people like what we saw in the Boston Marathon bombing. We just passed another anniversary of that attack, where you have people who came in on a visa, overstayed their visas, and no one checked in on them. There were red flags. No one saw them. So this is, again, in an effort to create more security, to vet individuals who are here, to create a system where people follow the rules, where we have immigrants that are legal, not illegal. And this is the nuances that are totally sidestepped and really blurred in the media here in the United States. And it's very, very unfortunate because we do have a beautiful country of immigrants, but, the way that things are going, it's become very polarized, where one side thinks that you have to open up all the borders and let anybody and everybody and anybody who has a desire should be let in. And the other side is portrayed as not letting anybody in, not even those who are refugees or have a humanitarian case or a story. So the truth always lies within those two extremes. And in this case, it's in fact that.
The Mexican police crackdown on migrant caravan is one of the largest single raids since the mass exodus began. And Lisa, Arizona's mayor has even declared a state of emergency amid the immigration crisis.
Exactly. So this is the reality that goes on at the border. Many people visiting the border to see that reality. And Donald Trump did that actually a couple of weeks ago, going down to the border to see the reality. I was at a meeting about 2 weeks ago, and the governor of Texas spoke, and he made the same plea that the reality on the ground is totally different. Those who live on or near the border can't deal or can't live with this reality of these immigrants pushing through. And when you have a state like Arizona calling for a state of emergency, that tells a bigger and better and more accurate picture of what's going on. Mexico had to do the same thing. You look at, a country like Mexico that's able to absorb perhaps more and differently immigrants from Latin America, same continent, same language. There'd be less of that kind of assimilation process, more jobs, etc. And you don't see that. You see them also having to deal with a reality. Again, what we see in the philosophy and what we see in reality are two very different things. But these stories, Hal, that you just read, these headlines tell the accurate portrayal of what's going on the border.
Our foreign affairs and ISIS expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles via Skype. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, be well, have a great